Well, welcome to another issue of the Electric Bison, so named because electricity has become vital to our society the way that the buffalo was back in the day of the Native American. Maybe we'll get that back someday, but right now we're really relying on this intermediate energy form that we can't do without. Today's guest, I'm really pleased. I haven't seen him he's been sunning himself down in California, but my friend Randy LeCoq, and if you read the book that he and I wrote together, he's the one that caused it. It was about the Battle of the Bulge. And after that, I wrote another book about a field trip that we took to take the Battle of the Bulge around Montana. And I personally was astonished at how little interest there was in World War II. And it worried me. And it was kind of a preface to this last election. People don't seem to realize what we might be going to lose. But the Battle of the Bulge book shows what Montanans paid to keep our freedom. And not today, but probably the weekend, two episodes from now, Randy and I are going to meet again about the Battle of the Bulge as a way to celebrate Memorial Day. And if you want to become more familiar with that huge battle, which was, at least a dozen smaller important battles, you may want to go back through the earlier episodes, say episode 3 through about 30, and see the different aspects of that fight. And then when we talk about it for the Memorial Day weekend, we'll have some maps and be able to show you where the people from Montana were involved. But it was quite an exceptional display of courage to defend democracy. And Randy talked me into doing it. I was going over to Belgium for a different reason, but he talked me into going over to Bastogne, and I'm really glad that I did. And hopefully together we'll be able to relay what we learned from that trip. Between now and that Memorial Day weekend, the episode between, we'll talk about Putin and Trump, President Putin and our President Trump and President Zelensky, possibly the President of Finland, who's somehow become more involved, and what's being done with this attempt to have a peace between Russia and Ukraine. But I don't think we're ready to talk about that yet. I think the process has still got a ways to mature, and maybe won't even mature by then, but we need to first learn about the people in Russia, because they're the ones that put Putin in, just like we're the ones that put President Trump in, and we're still learning about ourselves. But Randy here, he's not from Area 57, but he is from Roswell, New Mexico. He's a Westerner. He went to school in Texas. Don't hold that against him. But he's really knowledgeable, and he spent a lot of time in Russia as a Foreign Service officer. And so, by way of introducing him, so that we can talk about the people of Russia, I'd like to ask him the first question, which is, how did you get from Area 57 to the night that you had to go out in the middle of Siberia to turn the lights on, to get the airport director out, turn the lights on, so that Kissinger's airplane could land and get refueled and go on to some kind of peace negotiation? What happened in those intervening years that got you from one place to the other?
Well, history. I was a history major in college. Coming out of Roswell, I went to Texas Tech and had a really good Russian history professor named Idris Trailer, mentor. And so I got involved in that, and I didn't really study the language, but I studied Eastern European and Russian history quite a bit. It's Tsarist history primarily. So I had a background. Then later after the Army, I went to graduate school at Georgetown. And again, I took courses on dealing with Russia, and I had another professor there who helped me go around to the Army War College, Inter-American Defense College, and talk about communism and socialism and so forth. So I don't know, it just seemed like that I always wanted to be overseas and do the Foreign Service thing. Georgetown was a logical place to go, so I did. And it's what led me to Russia. My first tour, I was in Israel during Camp David, and I was the ambassador's aide. But I wanted to go to Russia. And I told the department I wanted to go to Russia, and they let me go. I went in 1979, back in the old days, back under Brezhnev, the Cold War. It was really a tough time with the Polish solidarity movement going on. The Russians sent troops into Afghanistan the first time they sent troops anywhere after World War II outside their own country. It caused quite a stir. And then also it led eventually to the shoot down of the Korean airliner over Sakhalin Island. So I guess it was just kind of a natural progression from, I had an uncle who was an importer in Mexico. I worked with him in the summers, and I knew I wanted to do something in foreign affairs, and I got interested in Russia. And so the State Department, I spent half my career in the State Department dealing with Russia. The other half I dealt with Africa. I did that too. But my first assignment, like I say, was Israel. But through my years, 25 years in the State Department, I had a lot of experience with Russia in both the old era and the new era. And that's valuable, I think, to be able to be there like I was 1979 in the political section in Moscow. And to be going to Ukraine at that time to close our consulate down there because of Russian going into Afghanistan. We boycotted the Olympics and we closed our consulate in Kiev. They sent me down to close it. I closed it. So I got to know some Ukrainians at that time. And I got to see how Ukrainians and Russians look at each other and feel toward each other. It was a valuable thing. Then I went off and did other things, and I came back to Russia in 1991, right at the time when Gorbachev was leaving and Putin was coming in, and there was a coup against Gorbachev, if you remember at that time, on August 19th, 1991. I arrived at that time. So Russia was in turmoil. It was fighting between the conservatives and the reformers, between the Gorbachev-Yeltsin people and the old hardliners. And so that was the beginning of the Yeltsin era, and so I spent from 1991 to 1994 in Moscow and Vladivostok and traveling around the Russian Far East. They made me what they called a circuit rider, like a judge in the old days. Where they said, okay, we have a new relationship with Russia under Yeltsin now, so we're going to take these people in the political section that speak Russian and have experience on Russia. We're going to send them out to different parts of the former Soviet Union. They're now independent. And we're going to build relationships, and we're also going to put a new consulate in the Russian Far East and Eastern Siberia, and ended up in a place with Vladivostok. So they sent me out, and I like being a field man. I like being on the road alone, even in the winter. Sometimes sick in hotel rooms out there, but the Russian people were wonderful. They always take care of you, and never had a bad experience. And so I was a circuit rider. They sent me out to open a new consulate in Vladivostok, which I did, and then I became consul general there for a couple of years. And they also sent me at that time, they say, oh, we're opening up a new embassy in Turkmenistan, Ashgabat. So go down there. We want you to go down there, spend a couple weeks, hire staff, get telecommunications set up. You know, here's an Inmarsat. Take it out there so you can see which way to point the antenna. I had a suitcase I carried with me, an Inmarsat. They said, by the way, if you lose it, you owe us $50,000. I didn't lose it. So when I did open up Turkmenistan, they sent me to Georgia because they had a new embassy opening up there, and I went there. They sent me to Kazakhstan at one time. We had all these new embassies opening up. Putin later blames us, saying we had a plot against him to take away the old former Soviet Union by establishing the embassies and so forth, but we didn't. At that time, we were even talking about Russia joining NATO, Partnership for Peace. And I know I wasn't out there to do anything like that. We were just trying to establish relations with the new countries. So anyway, that was a good experience. 1991, 1994, it was really busy. I'd be in Vladivostok trying to negotiate a new consulate building, and then they take me off and they say, go to Turkmenistan, off to Turkmenistan. Then they say, you know, oh, we have a congressional delegation going to Chelyabinsk or to Semipalatinsk, Kazakhstan or whatever, and we want you to go with them and run them around. So I was with Carl Levin at Babi Yar outside of Kiev, Senator Levin, Michigan. And so it was quite an exciting time for 3 years, 91, 94. So I saw the old age, the old communist era under Brezhnev, when we were, we were having a hard time. The depths of the Cold War. And Reagan called it the evil empire. They called him a cowboy. It was a tough time for relations. And then from there, the next time I went back, it was Yeltsin, Gorbachev, you know. And I was in St. Petersburg, Russia, on Christmas Eve on 1991 when Gorbachev handed over to Yeltsin and the red flags came down. I was in Leningrad watching the red flags come down and the Russian tricolor go up. So that was a good experience. So I had that experience. I got the old and then I got the new under Yeltsin. And then I left, 94 I left. I went back and worked in the State Department. We're in the Clinton administration now. I know it's probably terribly boring, but
No, I want to hear this.
we're in the Clinton administration now.
He doesn't even tell me this over a beer. Seriously.
We've had lots of beers
So tell
in
me.
Belgium. But so I go back again. I told myself after the first time, the old Soviet Union. I left in 1981 under Brezhnev era, and I said I'm so glad to get out of here. When I was in that Pan Am jet at Sheremetyevo Airport at Domodedovo in Moscow, getting ready to fly out, I said I'm not coming back. I'm not coming back. I'm not going to do this. I spent my whole life studying the language and the history and the culture, you know, reading Pushkin and reading Chekhov and reading Dostoevsky. I'm not going to do it. I don't want to live in this type of a country anymore. Well, when they call you, you go. It's like the military, right, John?
Yeah.
So they called me. They said 1991. I said, guess what? George Bush Sr. and Gorbachev decided to open up a couple new consulates. We're going to get to know each other. We're friends now. Russia's changed. It's perestroika, it's glasnost. It's true. And so they said, we need to send some guy out to Siberia. Who do you think will be silly enough to go out to Siberia? So they picked me to open a new consulate and be the consul general. And small staff. But so that was my second time I was there. And then I left after, I went back even though I said I wasn't going to. And I did it. It was nice under the Yeltsin era. I had a lot of friends in Vladivostok. I was out on my own with the consulate, with our people. We had USIA, Peace Corps, Commerce Department, Defense Department. We had everybody out there. We had ship visits from the 7th Fleet, Admiral Larson. It was an exciting time building a relationship with the new Russia. And I still have some of those friends. So I did that for 3 years. I went back and worked in the State Department in Legislative Affairs, Legislative Affairs, and my account was Russia under the Clinton administration. And that meant trying to support with the Republican Congress, trying to support Freedom of Support Act and Nunn-Lugar. Those were the two things I was working on. Plus I was working on the Russians that had built a nuclear reactor at Bushehr in Iran. And we had Frank Wisner come in and work on that. And so I worked with him. And with the Gore-Chernomydrin Commission, we had our Vice President Gore, they had their Vice President Chernomydrin. They worked together on all these issues. And I was in the State Department back in Washington in Legislative Affairs, working with Congress, with the staffers for Mitch McConnell and Jesse Helms and everybody on that. So that's what I did then. Then I went back. Then I went back to Russia again, but not to Russia. I went back to Belarus, Lukashenko. And I was, so we're talking now, it's been, again, a few years. I left Russia in 1994, and in 1998 they said, we've had a fight with Lukashenko in Belarus, and he's basically taken away our ambassador's residence in a dispute over democracy and human rights. We need to send somebody out there to be acting ambassador for 15 months, maybe more. So there you go, Randall. They found a sucker to go out again. There I go. Yeah, I told my wife, I said, I don't think I want to go, but I went. And so I stayed there for 2 years, in 1998 to 2000, fighting basically fighting for democracy in Belarus as the deputy chief of mission and then charge d'affaires. And it was not easy. It was not easy. So I got a taste of the old Brezhnev, I got a taste of the new Yeltsin, and then I got a taste of the post-Yeltsin Lukashenko type, almost like Putin's administration today, pretty much trying to support Democrats against Lukashenko's government. But so I've had all three experiences in Russia altogether. I lived there 7 years, and then I left the Foreign Service at the end of my tour in Belarus in 2000 and retired and came out here, where John got me involved in a number of things.
Well, the thing is that my first connection with he's been called Magoo all of his life, believe it or not.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but he has been. I got involved with Magoo when we went back to the Pentagon. We needed a place to stay,
that's
and
right,
so we
yeah.
stayed in your apartment.
Yeah.
And I remember going into this apartment, it was pretty close to the Pentagon, if I recall.
Yeah.
And
It was.
there was a picture of Randy and Pope John Paul, the two of them together like old drinking buddies. And you were working at that time on the Mozambique peace
Yeah.
talks.
You've also worked Mozambique. Yeah, I was working
Yeah.
on Mozambique at that time.
Yeah,
I was a desk officer for Mozambique,
yeah,
and we were doing peace talks with the Vatican. We were facilitating, the Vatican was mediating, and so that was a wonderful experience. We succeeded in basically ending the civil war between Frelimo and Renamo in Mozambique
Yeah.
at that time.
Boy,
I
that
got 5
must-
trips to Rome, which wasn't bad.
yeah. You were in other parts of Africa too.
Yeah, Ethiopia during the famine of '84, which was my most gratifying tour.
Yeah.
It was terrible, of course, the suffering. And this is where you see where AID played an important role. I mean, our food aid, we think it saved maybe 2 million people.
Yeah.
We lost 1 million.
Yeah.
I came on the desk, and it's a subject that, after being out there and visiting with feeding camps and so forth, it's hard to talk about it. But they gave me a year at Stanford after that as a reward.
Yeah, I remember that was a terrible famine.
Mhm.
When we were smoke jumping, we used to get those MREs, meals ready to eat, right?
yeah.
You just pop them in the
Yeah.
hot water and cook them.
Yeah.
But they were called, they said MRE stood for meals rejected by Ethiopians.
Is that right? I've never heard that.
Yeah. Well,
like-
so
Yeah.
which one of those tours into Siberia or into Russia?
Right.
Did that happen? That the
My
night that you had to go wake up the airport guy and
Yeah,
then
that
get
was
the
my-
gas pump started?
That was when I was a circuit rider and opening up Vladivostok in 1991.
Yeah.
When Yeltsin was just coming into power.
Yeah.
And people out in the Russian parties were still on the fence a little bit. You know, they didn't know if they were going to be Democrats or going to be, you know, Yeltsin was meeting a lot of opposition in Moscow from the old communists and the nationalists, the Red Browns, in the Duma. And so the people in the Russian parties were watching this experiment with Yeltsin and Gorbachev, but they weren't quite sure how they felt about it.
Yeah.
So they sent me out there to open up a consulate, but mainly I was traveling around the whole region, just getting to know the region. You know, I was in Magadan, in Yakutsk, up on the Arctic Circle. I was in Nakhotka, I was in Blagoveshchensk, I was in Khabarovsk, all the capitals out there in about 7 states, including Sakhalin, Kamchatka. And they told me, I was out there traveling around and trying to set up a consulate in Vladivostok. And they said, Randall, we have a special plane coming in. It's an Air Force One type of plane coming in, and
To Vladivostok?
to Khabarovsk, which is 600 miles away from Vladivostok, pretty close out there. But you know,
How big is it comparable to in Montana?
well, it's Vladivostok is over on the Pacific coast, and you go east into Siberia, not as far as Lake Baikal by any means, but you're still maybe it's 400 miles, but it's from say here to say Billings, right, or maybe further, maybe Alzada.
Yeah.
You're right. My uncle was from Alzada, so it was quite a ways, and they said, get over there right away. We have a plane coming in. And I didn't know it at the time, but the plane was Henry Kissinger on his way to China, coming out of Alaska on a Boeing 747 with the United States of America written on it. And so I went out and met him that night at the airport. And this is a story John knows, that you know how nice the Russians were to me. I still have very warm feeling toward the Russian people. I went out there that night to meet this plane coming in. And it was winter, it was cold. And I knew the airport director in Khabarovsk, which is another major city of about, I don't know, 500,000 people, about like Vladivostok. And it was the center of the Russian parties in the old days, Khabarovsk. And I went out there, I was at the airport, and I saw the plane come in and land, and I never went up in the plane because they said the passenger, which was Kissinger, I found out, was asleep. So I didn't bother him. I just stayed there, passed messages to him for his staffer to wake him up or if he needed to know something. But there was just a refueling stop.
Yeah.
And I was there in case he needed anything. Kissinger needs anything, I'm there.
What time of the day was this?
This was at night. This was 11 o'clock at night.
So you had to wake everybody up?
I did the airport. They opened it up for me. You know, I was the consul general. Or they knew I was going to be consul general. I knew I represented the ambassador out there. And so they were really good. They opened it up. They liked Kissinger. As you know, he opened up Russia in
Yeah, that's right.
72. And so I never saw him on the plane. I was just a Foreign Service officer out there as he went off the fluid, took off on the runway leaving. I was standing on the edge of the runway just watching the plane go off, saluting as he went off, you know. And afterwards, this is typical of the Russians, I flew over on a small Yak-40, a small 20-passenger Russian plane. We used to say yakety yak and don't look back because it was not a great plane. But I flew over on this thing, Aeroflot, out of Vladivostok. Got over there, time to meet the plane, did all that, took care of Kissinger, and then I didn't know how I was going to get back, so I thought I'd stay in Khabarovsk overnight. I knew the town well, it was in my district. And the airport director said to me, he said, Lecoq, you need a way to get back to Vladivostok. I said, well, yes, I guess so, but there's no flights. Flights are all gone, it's late.
Yeah.
He said, we have a plane over here, a Yak-40, with 2 pilots ready to go.
Wow, that's cool.
I know. He said, if you want to go back, we'll take you. And they did. No, that's typical. That's typical how we in Russia were getting along in those days, and we still can.
Yeah.
I mean, it was really warm and really nice, and he knew we were both government service out there working. You know? And I rode back in that plane, and I wrote about this in my book, as you know. I rode back in that plane to Vladivostok that night thinking, wow, you know, this is pretty tough duty going out and just having to go out there just to stand by the plane for half an hour with Kissinger for no reason, really. I mean, I didn't do anything, just make sure everything went smooth.
Yeah.
You got refueled smooth and everything. If you need anything, I was there. And then to go back, but I was thinking to myself, going back, I was thinking, yeah, you know, when you think about it, we wouldn't be even having a consulate in Vladivostok. I wouldn't be out here if it wasn't for that guy in the plane, really.
Yeah.
You know, what he and Nixon at the time did to reopen Russia and reopen China. But it was typical of the treatment I got in the Russian Far East. Everywhere I went, I'd ride on trains from city to city out there. I took a lot of trains. And people would invite me into their cars, into their compartments. They'd break out the sausages and the cheese and the Russian black bread and vodka. And, you know, I got to meet more people on the trains, Russian people, very warm. So it was a great experience. Those 2 years, 3 years I had in Vladivostok were a wonderful experience. And it's a shame the post is closed now.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, it's closed.
Is that recent or?
That was a couple years ago.
Well, you know, back in Hamilton when there was a guy named Cash, old Mr. Cash. He used to go around to he'd go in the Green City trash barrels and pick out newspapers, and he was all real ruddy and had an Elmer Fudd hat. One time I was knocking on doors running for office, and I went into I didn't realize where he lived, but he had a nice little house on Main Street, so I went in to see him, and it turned out he had been in Siberia with the American Siberian Expeditionary Force. Right?
Oh, yes.
Wow. He was telling me about that, you know, keeping the railroad open just after World War I. And he says he really liked the Russian women. He still liked them yet. He said that was the best. Well, you were in the you were in the Wolfhounds, weren't you?
We were there, 1918.
That was one of their early assignments.
That's right, yeah. And in fact, I remember going out there and wanting to do a book on that too, because it's so interesting how we sent troops out there in 1918. But I was once riding in a taxi cab from Vladivostok Airport to the city center, and at the time, when I first went out there, Vladivostok was a closed city. It was a home port for the Russian Pacific Fleet, along with Kamchatka. And so we weren't allowed to go out there. I had to get special permission. It was closed. And I got in the taxi cab and I was riding into that downtown Vladivostok the first time. And I was looking at all the Russian people along the streets, bundled up in their coats, very cold, you know. And I said to the cab driver, I wanted to know a little bit about how they felt about Yeltsin because I heard they were on the fence, like maybe a third of the people were pro-Yeltsin, a third of the people were old-fashioned hardliners, and a third of the people were in the middle.
Yeah.
And I was trying to find out. So in a nice way, without, being sneaky about it, I was just talking to the cab driver. He's smoking his typical sulfur cigarette, and I tried to put my seatbelt on. He said, "Ni nada, you don't need it." And whenever a Russian cab driver tells you you don't need a seatbelt, you better get it on. I learned a lot about Russia that day. Ni nada, don't need it. So normal, everything's normal, everything's okay. So I was riding in with him, and I saw a young Russian couple standing on the street corners. We stopped at the stoplight, my first time in town. And I was trying to make conversation with him. So I said, Russian women are beautiful. He says, "Все женщины красивые." All women are beautiful.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Isn't that nice?
I like that.
That was nice.
Yeah.
But I did talk to him about Yeltsin. I said, "What do you think about Yeltsin? You think the people support Yeltsin? They like him, He said, "On president." He's president, of course. He's president. That tells you a little bit about Russian thinking. They support their president generally.
Yeah.
That's right, too. Anyway, that's just a side story about the Yeltsin thing. I thought that was interesting, and that's what I found out with the Russians, is they tend to support the president. And Putin's playing on that, of course, now. I mean, he has 78% of the vote, apparently.
Yeah, he's really got a popular, and it seems to be real popularity.
Yeah, it does. It seems to be popular. The war, too. He's wrapped himself in nationalism. And you know how a strong force nationalism, John,
Yeah.
is. It's really tough. And when you wrap yourself in nationalism, and when the people are only being told one thing, remember William Shirer wrote Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, and he talked about he said, if you don't live in a country like he lived in Nazi Germany in the 1930s and Hitler, I mean, I'm not making a comparison with Russia right now, but he's saying if you don't know what it's like to live in an authoritarian regime, you don't know the effect of propaganda, but you're only getting your information from one source.
Yeah.
And you don't hear anything else, and it's constant.
Yeah.
Shirer said he didn't know until that time how influential propaganda could be. And I've had Russian friends come back to visit me and to talk to them on the phone or whatever, and you can see that I think he does have support.
Yeah.
Playing on that.
Well, I noticed that Putin, he starts out as a young he's a St. Petersburg guy, right? So he's over in East Germany with the KGBs, an agent handler, handling foreign intelligence, so he knows how to handle assets.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he's trained to do. And then he gets out of that game. I'm not exactly sure when, but he ends up in the mayor's office in St. Petersburg.
Mayor Sobchak, yeah.
And then and St. Petersburg's a big deal. I mean, his mother and father almost died starving to death during the war.
That's right.
I mean, that was awful what happened there at St. Petersburg. But the picture that he puts up on the wall is not Yeltsin or Brezhnev or Gorbachev. It's Peter the Great. That's what he puts up behind his desk.
Yeah,
so that's not a small thing. I mean, where does Peter the Great fit into his thinking and in the people's thinking?
Well, I mean, that's what he's kind of restored their pride. They were suffering a loss of pride when they lost their empire. Countries have a hard time giving up empires. But the world changes. You have to do it. Britain had to do it. France had to do it. Everybody has to do it. Prussians. So I got off your subject. What was the question again? John?
About Peter the Great. How?
Oh, well, he admires Peter the Great. I mean, he's missing the Russian Empire. And a lot of Russians are missing the Russian Empire. And he's restored their pride a little bit. They lost pride.
We're not talking USSR. We're talking back in the day, 1700.
That's right. Well, Peter the Great was in the late, into the 1600s and beginning of the 1700s, and Catherine the Great came along later on, the last of the 1700s, and she expanded even more. They had the partition of Poland, and they took over, at that time, Ukraine, the rest of it, before they had focus on the Tatarstan and all the Tatar areas in the south. And they built this empire, and they liked it. I mean, I knew the Russian people always kind of liked their empire. When I was in Vladivostok, like I was talking to you, when I was there in 1991, the Yeltsin era, I would ask them, my Russian contacts, I'd say, well, what do you think about, they would complain to me. We'd be sitting in the banya, and
the banya is what?
it's a bathhouse or something you go out and
So you got paid to do this?
yeah. Yeah, I drank too much vodka out there too. But you sit around on Thursday nights or whatever with these guys. And
Yeah.
these guys are influential people. They're the head of the Russian fishing fleet, or maybe they're the head of the Cossack organization, or maybe they're the head of the telecommunications, and maybe they're deputy governor, deputy mayor. But so you sit around with these guys, you learn a lot. And I say, well, I was telling them, they're bemoaning the fact, you know, they just lost the Soviet Union, you know. They lost all of the 14 provinces from the Baltic states, the Caucasus, Central Asia, you know, they lost them all. And we told them, I would tell them, I said, don't worry about it. They're more trouble than they're worth. You know, don't worry about it. It's a new world now. We're not basing relations in the world anymore on old dynastic families or nation states. Now it's based on common European homeland and new values and the rule of law. And, you know, it's like the UN Charter. That was my spiel.
That was your pitch. How'd they go for it?
That's what I'm getting to. They would say, oh, yeah, we hate losing the empire, you know. And then later in Belarus, I would tell them, you know, you can't support the Serbs on Kosovo, you know. And they say, oh, the Serbs are like our cousins. They're like, you know. You learn after a while how important this revived. And they were proud people. The Russians are always proud. Even my first tour, I learned that.
Yeah.
That they kind of missed going to. They had the pride. In the old days, they would go to Riga, walk the cobbled streets like I did at that time, in the Hanseatic cities of Baltic states on the Baltic coast. They'd go down for their vacations on the beach down in Crimea or Georgia, you know. Or they would go down to Kiev, or they go to Odessa, where I went, or they might go. You know, they had the feeling of expansion, that feeling of having an empire, and it meant something to them.
Yeah, yeah.
And they got a lot of pride from their Olympic team, which had nationalities, Uzbek wrestlers and everybody. I mean, they got a lot of pride, you know, and they got a lot of products and population and all that, and they were feeling the loss. I told them, I said, it's a new world. Forget about this. It's a new world. You'll do fine with these people. You can have your cultural influence. You can have your language connections.
Yeah.
You can have your religious connections and so forth. You won't. Maybe you'll need a passport to go to the mosques down there and the exotic lands in Central Asia, but it doesn't make any difference. You'll still be close. You know, but I learned that no, they weren't entirely buying us on this. They
Be like us if we lose, like in our joint warfighting superstructure, we have Northcom, Southcom, Central Command.
Right.
We basically have officers in charge of pieces of the entire world,
Yeah.
and maybe we won't have that any longer. It's kind of our empire,
Yeah.
and that's of course what Putin's pushing
Yeah.
for, is a multipolar world where we're not in everybody's business, and we might have to get used to that ourselves.
Well, you were asking, he does admire Peter the Great, and he admires the Russian Empire, and I think that's what he's trying to do, is restore the Russian Empire. He believes in the sphere of influence and balance of power politics, and he really is trying to restore Peter the Great's empire. And
well, what happened? I mean, here's this guy, I think he was still the mayor of St. Peter, and then Yeltsin says, I'm out of here, you got it. What happened there? How'd that happen?
Well, he was deputy mayor under a Sobchak in St. Petersburg. You're right about his family. He grew up in a one-room apartment with his mother in St. Petersburg, so he, I guess he was deputy mayor under Sobchak in St. Petersburg, and Yeltsin was going through prime ministers. Had several that didn't work out, trying to hold the country together. You know, there was a lot of people who were not happy with the way Russia was going. They had a hard time, as you know.
Yeah.
And so basically, he had severed his relationship with the KGB, but he still had all those KGB friends, of course. And but Yeltsin came to him at the very end and said, "I need you to be my prime minister. Maybe you can help hold the thing together. I'm not going to be around for long. I'm going to be leaving. You know, I need you to do it." And he apparently did that for Yeltsin. So he went from being working with Sobchak, who was a Democrat, to working for Yeltsin, who was a Democrat. And then Yeltsin left in 2000. He took over the whole
So
show.
would you call Putin a Democrat now, or what would you call him?
No, he's a
He's changed to
autocrat
some-
now, yeah.
You're an autocrat.
Yeah.
Well, up in Butte, when I was living up there before I went back to the Pentagon, we had maybe one of the last meetings of the Butte Press Club. That was a thing. And the guest speaker was Ted Turner. And he came over from Bozeman, from his ranch, and he was sitting there. There was a small group of us. And he talked about when he would go to, I think Moscow, maybe St. Petersburg, because he gave $1 billion to create some kind of a nuclear peace structure, arms control structure. But he says he would be driving, and the guy driving the car, he'd be in the back, was this little guy, and it was Putin driving the car. And it was before Putin was a big name. And then he goes back later, and Putin's like, the main guy. And so Turner says, the rule that you learn from that is, be careful of the little guys on your way up, because you may have to deal with them on your way down.
Oh, that's a good point.
That was a really good point.
Well, I had a professor at Stanford named Alexander Dallin, who was a really good one. He was at Columbia and Stanford. He was a Russia expert. He was former Russian himself. And he taught us that there was a traditional struggle in Russia between the Westernizers and the Slavophiles. And this is just one of the common theories about Russia. And that I think I've seen both sides.
Yeah.
And I think I've seen both sides of the same person, two sides of the character.
Yeah.
On the one hand, you've got the Russian who is proud of his president, supports the president, doesn't necessarily have the democratic traditions that we have from the Scottish Enlightenment. And, but nonetheless, is not entirely going along with the authoritarian mold either, which the Slavophiles, of course, say, we don't need the West. Western democracy, liberal democracy, is not suited for Russia, where the people demand order, right? Then they say, well, like I say, this struggle is going on. There's one third. But so they have the Slavophiles who are saying, like Putin has finally decided, well, we'll just go autarky. We'll just take care of ourselves with our own resources. We don't need the Western Europe and the Americans and so forth. We'll build ties with China. We'll be a Eurasia power. And we'll have all the BRICS, all of the other countries that we have former friendships, treaties of friendship and cooperation with, and so forth. All of our former clients around the world will be friends. We don't need the West if they're going to, be rough on us. So you got that, the Slavophiles, who are the old-fashioned guys. Then you got the Westernizers, who are the guys who want to be modern and progressive and democratic and parliamentarian. And so there's that struggle going on between the two. We've seen it play out in Russia. A lot of times when they'll have people come in and do reforms. Like even Khrushchev has some reforms in '55 and so forth, and '53. And then you have, before that, in 1962, you have a group of reformers, young Westernizers. And then again, Gorbachev came along in '85 and changed everything with reform. So you got those groups that do come in to the picture. And then you got the other groups who move back the other way. I don't know where Putin's going ultimately.
Well, what does he have, Randy? I mean, we're not. I mean, even with Trump, I mean, we're not talking about one guy. We're talking about an environment of staff people.
Right.
That well, you could either have, like here, you have Congress and the judiciary and the White House, or you have interest groups.
Yes.
Or you have the one man, which we're pretty close to one man, both with Putin and Trump, and what their psychology is, which kind of worries me about where this might end up. But assuming there's more than Putin, who are the people around him that are saying, that did the analysis on Trump before they made him an asset? I mean, who did that work?
Well, I think that Putin's pretty much in control, maybe the way that Khrushchev was. He doesn't have a Politburo of 9 or 14 guys that he has to run things by.
He doesn't. Okay.
He has oligarchs. It's his own network of people that are loyal
Just
to
like
him.
Trump. Yeah,
loyal to him. that, and you're always asking that question, well, where does he get his power from? Is it from the people? Is it from the elites? Who gives him that power? Is it from the legislature, the Duma? It's a one-party state. And I think the answer is that basically he controls everything, I think. We don't know. See, that's the problem. And I've been away for so long now that I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm fascinated that he was a KGB agent and he handled foreign intelligence assets, because he would know if you have a weak spot or if I have
That's
a weak
right.
spot and how to manipulate us.
Yeah.
That he'd be an expert
That's
at that.
right, yeah.
Maybe he doesn't need anybody.
Yeah. I'm still hoping that that maybe someday that he'll come around, or Russia will come around and say, you know, actually we do need Western technology. Actually, we're not just going to be allied to China.
Yeah.
Actually, we do need to look outward, and we need to accept a new common European homeland. I mean, some of his predecessors in the past have come to that conclusion.
Yeah. Well, I was the whole Kosovo thing, you know, where they came in behind the Serbs.
Right.
I can empathize with Putin. I really can in a lot of ways. Not with what he's doing in Ukraine right now. I totally think the Ukrainians have a good reason to be fighting. But
They do.
But he, you know, he was ever since the 2000 or in there. He was when NATO was very small. Before it did this expansion, the several stages of expansion, he was saying, "But wait, can't we work together?" He was saying that, and then Kosovo was in there somewhere where he was so mad. Remember they ran the tank company up to Pristina, you know, to just foul up our NATO operation, and he was trying to make a point. And during that Kosovo thing, the Serbs killed a bunch of Kosovars, like 15,000, and we came in and we saved the day. Yeah. And our army returned them to their houses, and our navy blockaded so they couldn't get the Serbs couldn't get weapons. And he was really upset by that. Yeah. But the numbers were much smaller than they are, say, in Ukraine now or in Gaza. Yeah. And but we came in and just slammed the door on him. And he, it seems to me when he came into Ukraine, he was using the same argument that we used to go into Kosovo, and without approval of the Secretary of the Security Council of the United Nations, which is what he was trying to get in Kosovo, because they were on the Security Council. So I can kind of see where he's coming from. I really can. So I hope there is a peace there, because I think Crimea, I mean, that was amazing that they got Crimea without a shot, basically. But for the Ukrainians and everybody else to get it back, it's going to be a bloody business. Wow. You know,
Khrushchev gave it away in 1954.
He gave it to the Ukraine?
Yeah, it's kind of strange. Nobody knew why, I don't think. But Putin, the trouble is that, and with Russians in general, if you go back and read dealing with Stalin, Yalta, for example, where we tried to tell him, look, you know, we can have a nice alliance. Roosevelt was trying to work with him on this, you know, the big three, and it didn't work out. I think that the Russians have this combination of entitlement, this imperial thing, you know, going on. At the same time, they have this kind of fear of their borders. There's a combination, and we never quite understood it. Truman kept asking Averell Harriman, what's going on here, you know? And he said, well, I think they confuse security and land sometimes, you know? They think they need land, and they need the near abroad. The countries on their borders have to be straightly there's no NATO coming east and so forth, you know? But that's all kind of an excuse, I think, just for imperial ambitions a little bit.
Yeah. Well, it's just the other end of it is the Ukrainians. My God, they've been slaughtered repeatedly. In the, you know, the Nazis, the communists, they're bloodlands, and I can certainly understand why they're putting up a fight. You know, I'm really hopeful. I'm concerned though that we've got it down to two personalities, to Trump and to Putin, and those two personalities seem to be getting along somewhat. But what happens if they don't? You know.
Well, I think that I've been reading Llewellyn Thompson. You remember Ambassador Llewellyn Thompson during the missile crisis? He was the hero. He's one that sort of saved the problem in the missile crisis.
What did he do?
Everybody was advocating that Kennedy do surgical airstrikes or all the hard, tough options. You know, we were quarantining
Yeah.
anyway. But Llewellyn Thompson said, no, I know Khrushchev. He spent a lot of time with Khrushchev family out at the Khrushchev's dacha in Russia. He was our ambassador in Moscow under Eisenhower and Kennedy. Llewellyn Thompson was really one of our experts. And he interrupted this, tell all the people in the ex-com Kennedy's group in 1962, no, there's a way out of this thing. We don't have to have a war with Russia over the Cuba thing. Khrushchev is looking for a way out. If we can give him something, give him an assurance maybe that we will never invade Cuba in the future or whatever, you know, or maybe under the table we'll give him some assurances we might at some point remove our missiles from Turkey. But
Yeah.
and but his point was always that to negotiate and to not to give up. And I think it's important to have these personal contacts and not to give up on Russia. I know we have to be tough, we have to be firm. And I'm with the Ukrainians all the way. I mean, I think that this is tragedy what's happened here.
Yeah, part of it, the two, when you get down to two personalities, it's like a bar fight. You know, those things start when people miscalculate who they're dealing with.
Yeah.
And in this case, both people, I mean, the war in Ukraine is a nuclear war. I mean, that started out, remember, Putin started it out by showing he could launch a missile. I can't remember if he had it poke its nose out of the ground or fired it in some distance.
Didn't know that.
But basically, it got our attention before his people invaded Ukraine. So basically, we've been on tenterhooks about that.
Yeah.
And I just wonder, what happens if he suddenly realizes he really screwed up with Trump, and he thinks Trump's going to launch something? What will he do? You know?
Well, I don't think we're there, really. I think both sides, we've been through enough crises together, the United States and Russia, that we know not to pull the rope too tight where you can't cut it, as Khrushchev said.
Yeah.
Right?
I
think
remember,
the Russians know that too.
I remember the night when you talked about the shoot down of that Korean Airlines. That was in '84.
Yeah.
And that's the year that I was sent over with the 3rd Armored Cav to the return of forces to Germany. I was up on the Czech border in the 1K zone.
Yeah.
And there was 18,000 of us had gone over there, and I was in the ground fog trying to find the third Armored Cav's commander to bring in the latest operations order. Yeah. And I knew that the Russian tankers were like one click, that was called the 1K zone, one click away, and they could see me in the fog with their thermal sights, you know, and I'm thinking, oh, you know, how did I get in this situation? Well, there was a bigger picture, because that's when we were doing that, Secretary of Navy, I can't remember his name, John whatever, he was pushing the Russians. He was going way up past the Icelandic Gap with our naval forces. Seemed very aggressive to the Russians. And then we were going into when we went into the island, Grenada.
Yes, right.
Which was a British protectorate or something. Right. So to go to Grenada, we had to communicate with the United Kingdom, and so they were reading all of our radio traffic. They were just seeing it between us, United Kingdom. Saw our fleet up north past the Icelandic Gap, the Danish Straits. Right. I'm in the ground fog in Europe with 18,000 of my fellow tankers. Wow. And suddenly that Korean Airlines gets shot down. And the reason that got shot down, it turns out, is they honestly thought we were starting to raise the ante. And McFarlane took over in the White House as the National Security Advisor, and he had a naval background. And there was going to be they were going to have Reagan and somebody else, Secretary of Defense. I can't remember his name, but they were going to go in and
Weinberger.
Weinberger. They were going to go in and do their part of this exercise. And McFarlane said, "Are you out of your mind? These guys are looking at this thing just totally in a template, and they thought we were actually sneaking up on them, going to go to war, and that's why they shot down that Korean Airlines."
Well, I remember what Reagan said when they said that it was that it was a spy plane. Yeah. You know, and it was shot down, probably by accident, because But Reagan said, "No, we know them for what they are." Remember that? Yeah. Very tough.
Well, the thing is, those mistakes could get pretty expensive.
They can. And I went to Sakhalin Island in 1994, which is 10 years for the 10th anniversary of that shoot down. And we took a bunch of family members from America and Korea out there on boats and laid wreaths on the water.
Yeah, wow.
And they brought out on the shore a lot of the equipment that had been salvaged from, children's toys and stuff that,
Wow.
from the passengers. It was kind of a sad thing, day
Yeah.
out there. And the Russians were helping us commemorate. That was what it was like in 1994, 10th anniversary, and I was representing the United States. And I'll never forget that I was sitting around talking with the Russian officials from Sakhalin, the governor. And at that time, they had a hardline governor, not a reformer. And he was saying, yeah, maybe it was a spy plane. And I was saying, no spy plane, no spy plane. And so there were a bunch of them standing around, and an old guy on a bicycle came up, and I was then, and he was a veteran. He wore his suit with his medals on it, like like they do the World War II guys,
Yeah.
And he comes pedaling up right in between us. And I'm right there with the Russian Pacific Fleet commanders there too, right there in that circle. And he stops, and he looks over at the Russians and he says, "There were women and children on that plane, right? It wasn't a spy plane. There were women and children on it." And they said, "Yeah, you're right. You're right." And the old guy got back on his bicycle and took off. And I thought, man, in the old days, he would have been in big trouble.
Yeah.
But I was hoping he was going to be okay. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And I turned to the Russians. The Russians said to me, the naval commander said, he said it was a bad day for everybody.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's like what Kennedy said during the Cuban Missile Crisis. He says, there's always some dumb SOB that doesn't get the word.
That's right. Yeah,
that's the way organizations
that's
are.
Right.
You know?
But I thought it was interesting that the Russian, even the hardliners were saying, they sort of were admitting that they had made a mistake. And,
Yeah. Well,
anyway, that's interesting, John. You got a lot of experience. That stuff in Czechoslovakia, was that in Grafenberg or?
No, what we did is we flew into. I can't believe how I forget stuff. Into
Wiesbaden?
No, it starts with an F.
Frankfurt.
Flew into Frankfurt.
Rhein-Main,
yeah, we went up above Rhein-Main, and we went up into the hills over Frankfurt in the dark, and we drew all of our equipment, and then got it ready to put up onto flat cars. And then the flat cars took the armor up to the 1K zone, and we went with it. And we were basically the screen for the 3rd Armored Division. The 3rd Armor was already there, and then the 3rd Armored Cav was the screen for them.
Wow.
And it was going to be an active defense against the Russians coming across. And then later on, when that phase was over, we were the screen for the 8th Infantry Division. They were the opposing forces. Very interesting, you know.
You were the tip of the spear, or the tripwire.
Totally. I mean, how did I know that they thought we were starting the 3rd World War? I mean, you don't know. I was the guy that didn't get the word, right?
Yeah. Well, it's important. That's why I think it's important. And Llewellyn Thompson always thought, no matter what, it's important to be talking.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that's true.
Yeah. So I give, that's true. Yeah. Okay, Randy.
John,
we're going to meet again. Thanks.
Thank you again.
Okay, stay tuned for next week.
Okay, thank you, John.